Hello students and welcome to a short presentation highlighting parts of Chapter 5. The name of this chapter is Carbohydrates. Now could you imagine a life without sugar as we know it? Cakes, soft drinks, ketchup, breads, sauces, jams and jellies, ice cream and candy, and the list goes on and on. You can see all these pictures here on the screen. Most of us think of these types of food items when we hear the word sugar, which is often why carbohydrates are villainized in our culture. However, carbohydrates are so much more than just the sweet, delicious things pictured on this slide. Carbs are naturally found in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans, all of which are foods that can be part of a healthy, nutritious diet. On the following slides, we will look a little closer at some interesting information related to carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are molecules made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is why you may see them called by the acronym CHO. These are arranged to form one or more sugar units, like glucose, as seen on this slide, which is just one sugar unit, and sucrose, which is made up of two sugar units, glucose and fructose, joined together with a glycosidic bond. Carbohydrates are found in many plant foods, such as fruits, grains, barley, and brown rice, and also in milk and milk products like yogurt. Carbohydrates are a key source of fuel for our bodies, especially our muscles, red blood cells, and brain, providing 4 kilocalories of energy per gram. Now, one of the other animations in our Blackboard material breaks carbohydrates down and discusses the differences between simple and complex carbohydrates, so be sure to take a look at that animation. Something I wanted to highlight in this presentation is some terminology that you may see when you're talking or listening to someone talking about sweeteners. And this slide focuses on nutritive, and the next slide will focus on alternative sweeteners. So honey, fruit, and maple syrup are examples of nutritive sweeteners, and it makes sense that those would provide calories. These types of sugars are either consumed by themselves, such as fruit, or added to foods to sweeten them. Food manufacturers add sugar to many foods to either increase the sweetness or also they sometimes are used as preservatives because they bind water in foods, lowering the water activity. Now, since microbes need available water for growth, when you reduce the available water, it keeps bacteria and molds from increasing, thereby preserving the food. If you check your food labels when you're shopping and you see that the first ingredient or one of the first ingredients is sugar, then the sugar content is likely quite high. Now, Table 5.2 in your textbook gives a fairly comprehensive list of names that you may see sugar called in foods. And if you think about it, some of these words are not easily identifiable as sugar. Unless you are educated in these names, you may not even recognize that the food product contains sugar at all. What I want you to read also is about high fructose corn syrup in the Beyond the Book tab, because that's also a hot topic. Conversely, alternative sweeteners are those that do not provide any energy, so they provide nearly zero or 0 calories. These types of sweeteners are often chosen by those trying to reduce their intake of calories from sugar. Sugar alcohols like xylitol, mannitol, sorbitol, and erythritol are also alternative sweeteners found in chewing gums, sugar-free breath mints and candies, and even some beverages. On the newest food label, added sugars will have to be disclosed. However, the sugar alcohols are not considered added sugar since they do not actually add calories. The label on the right shows an example of this on the slide. Other alternative sweeteners are the non-nutritive sweeteners, such as Splenda, Equal, or Sweet and Low, which are very sweet in comparison to the same amount of sugar. They're derived from plants, herbs, or even sugar itself, and Table 5.4 in the book shows the comparison of the sweetness of several non-nutritive sweeteners, and it compares it to regular table sugar. Okay, now shifting gears away from carbohydrates that sweeten foods, I wanted to briefly touch on complex carbohydrates, especially whole grains versus refined grains. Whole grains are those that contain the entire kernel, including the endosperm, bran, and germ. And some examples of these are quinoa, brown rice, and oats. Now, according to the 2015-2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans, one half of our daily grain intake should be from whole grains. And unfortunately, most of us do not take in the recommendation of 3 servings of whole grains per day. This is for several reasons, usually including taste and texture preferences. Because, for instance, whole grain bread, which contains the ground bran of the wheat grain, contributes ferulic acid to the bread, giving it a different taste than white bread, which does not contain the acid. Many people don't like the taste of the wheat bread because of this, and often sugar is added to make the bread taste better. The cost of whole grain bread is usually a little bit higher than white bread, if you notice when you're shopping. It often causes white bread to win out over wheat. Now, why are they more expensive? Generally speaking, the ingredients for white bread, for instance, can be bought cheaply in bulk, like white flour and sugar, and since white flour does not spoil as quickly, it can be stored in huge amounts and not purchased as often by companies who produce the bread. If the whole grain bread is organic, that can add even more cost due to stricter harvest and manufacturing methods. And the marketing of whole grain food products can be a bit deceptive, especially when you see terms like stone ground wheat or cracked wheat or made with wheat flour. In essence, these terms really don't mean a thing other than the bread may be made with white flour and have a few seeds sprinkled on the top of it. The Whole Grains Council has tried to simplify the act of identifying whole grains by providing a stamp that verifies a product as being made with whole grains. Let's take a look at that. So in 2003, a group was formed to help consumers identify more easily whole grain foods. The Whole Grains Council is a nonprofit consumer advisory group whose mission is to increase consumption of whole grains for better health. The council has developed 3 different stamps that may be used by food manufacturers for their packaging to indicate how much of a product contains whole grains. Now, you may have seen these before. This is a voluntary program, and in order to obtain the right to use the stamp, the manufacturer must be a member of the Whole Grains Council. Then their product's whole grain content must be verified by the council. It then becomes a legal binding contract between the council and the food company that the company will manufacture food products with the designated amount of whole grains in them. Even with the stamp on a food product, you have to carefully check the ingredients label, as many whole grain products still contain lots of added sugar, fats, and sodium. Okay, so what is a refined grain? Because you probably have heard this mentioned before. A refined grain is used to describe grains that are not whole because they're missing one or more of their 3 main parts, the bran, germ, or endosperm. The bran is the outer layer of the grain kernel and contains antioxidants, B vitamins, and fiber. And the germ, which is the plant embryo, contains B vitamins, protein, minerals, and healthy fats. So when these are removed during refinement, many nutrients are unfortunately lost. Now, when the milling technology developed in the late 1800s to remove the bran and germ from grains, interestingly enough, nutrition problems quickly arose, such as pellagra and beriberi. We learned earlier that pellagra is caused by a deficiency of niacin. Beriberi is a deficiency of thiamine or vitamin B1, and both of these vitamins can be found in whole grain foods. Now, it wasn't until the 1930s and 40s that the U.S. began to recommend grain products be enriched or replenished with the vitamins and minerals lost during refinement. Even though enrichment does increase the nutritional value of many foods, often the main sources of refined enriched carbohydrates are white flour, white bread, white rice, pasta, and breakfast cereals with lots of added sugars, fats, and sodium. Okay, this slide is out of order. I'm sorry. I'm going to go on. When it comes to carbohydrates, what is the typical American consume per day? On average, Americans consume 48% of their kilocalories from carbohydrates. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends that 45 to 65% of your total calories come from carbs. So for example, if you eat approximately 2,000 calories a day, Between 900 and 1300 calories should be derived from carbohydrates. This is about 225 to 325 grams of carbohydrates per day. And although carbs get a bad rap, they're vital to your health, especially if you focus on carbs from fiber-rich sources like fruits and vegetables, whole grains, low-fat dairy products, and legumes. Added sugars should be minimized or avoided completely since there's no health advantage associated with their consumption. Now, speaking of their consumption, in 2015, Americans consumed about 22 teaspoons of added sugars per day. Remember, these are not the sugars found naturally in foods like bananas or sweet potatoes, but the ones added, for instance, for flavor or texture. The dietary guidelines recommend that added sugars be kept at fewer than 10% of your total calories per day. And major sources of added sugars in the American diet are regular soft drinks and energy drinks. So, for instance, one of the popular energy drinks that's on the market right now, in one 16-ounce can, there are 54 grams of sugar. That's more than 13 teaspoons. That's almost hard to believe. So the bottom line, you really need to check your food labels, and the FDA is trying to make this easier. They announced a new nutrition facts label in 2016, which includes several changes. One of the major changes is the area for added sugars. Scientific data indicates that it's difficult to meet nutrient needs while staying within calorie limits if you consume more than 10% of total daily calories from added sugar. Now, by the year 2020, food manufacturers with more than $10 million in annual sales must conform to the new nutrition facts label, which has a specific area for added sugars. The companies with less than $10 million in annual sales have until 2021 to comply. And many companies have already complied with this. So right now on the market, you may see the old label still in use, and then right next to that, you may see a different product with the new label in use. This label should make it a bit easier to determine how much sugar is added to your food rather than lumping it all in as total carbohydrate. So let me go back. So what I want you to remember from this chapter is I need you to go and watch the other animations on the Blackboard site under Chapter 5, as these explain other aspects of carbohydrates. And if you have any questions, please contact me and I'll be happy to help. There's so much information about carbohydrates and the category is so broad. So I've just tried to hit a couple of interesting highlights from this chapter in this short presentation. So as I said, watch all the animations and let me know if you have questions.